Welcome to the St Emlyn's podcast. I'm Iain Beardsall. Now, before we start our next episode, recorded live at the Basics Conference in Leicestershire earlier this year, a quick mention of MedPod Learn. This is the project you've heard me talking about over the last few months, and I'm delighted to say it's finally live and available to download from the App Store and Google Play. It turns all your trusted FOAMed podcasts into structured CPD, with concise learning notes, single best answer questions, and role-specific reflection prompts for every single episode. It also includes a customized search so you can find exactly what you need. Everything you do, your listening time, MCQ answers, and reflections is downloadable in a single click for your appraisal or annual review. There's already thousands of episodes from dozens of excellent podcast creators in the app, and we're adding more all the time. You're already listening to St Emlyn's, and hopefully MedPod opens the door to all the other brilliant FOAMed podcasts available, while turning that listening into active learning. The app is free to download. There's a small subscription for the full learning tools, but you get a 1-month trial included, so you can try it properly, and I'd love to hear what you think. Just search for MedPod Learn on the App Store or Google Play, or click the links on the St Emlyn's homepage. And now, on with our next episode. Welcome to the St Emlyn's podcast. I'm Iain Beardsall, and we're again at the Basics Conference in Leicestershire at the Sketchley Grange Hotel, and delighted to have with me Halden Hutchinson-Basley, or Hutch as he's known to his friends and pretty much everybody else actually, to talk a bit about what he was talking about to the conference, but also some of the wider things he's doing as part of his other work. Hutch, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hello everyone, thanks for having me. I'm known as Hutch for obvious reasons. I am an intensive care medicine doctor and a pre-hospital doctor. It's great to be here at the Basics Conference. I started off as a basics doctor years and years ago. That's where my pre-hospital journey began. And the team asked me to come to give a human factors focused talk about a case I attended that involved a lot of challenges and how some of those challenges were addressed and confronted.
As I've seen with you before, you had a lovely narrative story through your talk, and it was one of those great talks where it's an example of how to take an audience with you. But you used an analogy to helicopters. I know pre-hospital medicine gets a little bit tired of helicopters and all of that business, but actually the analogy was really powerful. Could you just explain a little bit about what that analogy was and how it relates to a human factors thing? This was to do with if you have a failing engine, how long you've got to make decisions. But tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly. In the UK, at least, all of our air ambulance aircraft have 2 engines. That builds in a lot of redundancy and safety. If you lose one of those engines, the aircraft can still fly all right. But in an emergency setting, that one remaining engine can be required to generate extra power. And in an extreme emergency, it can be required to generate extra power to the point where it's likely to damage itself, which it can only do for a very short period of time. And the context I used was in a emergency configuration. This example, I was without my crewmate, so the other engine, and faced with some significant challenges. How could my mind and its performance relate to the performance of the aircraft engines?
And you're an experienced pre-hospital provider. We'll talk a bit later on about the courses you're involved with, and you instruct on some high-level courses. And I think we'd all agree, well, I'd at least agree, that you're at the top of your game when it comes to this sort of thing. And your crewmate on that day described you as always cool, always calm, never flustered. But you described a situation, we won't go into too much detail about the case now, but it was where lots of holes lined up to mean that you were ultimately challenged. Your crewmate wasn't there because they'd gone with another patient and you were driving back to meet them in the car that you'd been in. So it was a relatively routine thing that happens with pre-hospital teams, isn't it? You split up while one goes with the patient and you take the car back. But then you come across an accident, an incident that happens, and you're confronted by an incredibly sick patient at the point where it sounded like you were completely cognitively overloaded and on your own. And you were describing how you got through that and how you tried to translate that into what other people could do. Can you just tell us a bit about how it felt in that moment? So this was a traumatic cardiac arrest. You're on your own. It's dark. You've got a police officer with you, but that's about it. There's a traffic coming up both sides of the road, and it's down to you.
Yeah, I can almost feel how it felt now, but I don't know brilliantly how to articulate it. I think I did feel a really profound sense of clarity. I remember feeling very clear about everything. I can sort of see things still very clearly from how it was. And I think that probably reflects the intensity that I was asking my mind to perform at, that I formed very strong memories, and I can recall it with laser clarity. And I felt very clear about things at the time. And I felt very purposeful about things at the time. But I also felt really stretched. And the reason I likened this to helicopter engines is, imagine you take an engine, you push it to its absolute maximum power to the point where it starts to falter. And if you do that for too long on a helicopter engine, it slows down, your helicopter will crash. I recall the feeling of my mind doing that. And I recall pushing my mind as hard as I could and getting the feeling of I can't give you any more. I've got no more power left. I can't make any more decisions. And so what remaining brain power I had spare, I realized I had to do something to create capacity to make more decisions. And if I wasn't making decisions, I wasn't helping anybody. That's probably the clearest way I can articulate how I felt.
So in that moment, you've recognized, which I think is probably step one, that you're cognitively overloaded and you need to do something different.
Yeah.
And I think from your talk, it sounded like, despite all the work you've done with ATACC and SPEAR and other courses that you run, actually maybe you weren't as prepared for this as you could have been because you didn't really expect it to happen. We've been to jobs, all of us, where actually en route to a job, you got time to prepare, but you had no time to prepare for this at all. This job happened in front of you and you were kind of part of it. What now, having had this happen to you, would you recommend to other people to prepare for that moment when they feel cognitively overloaded? What are the practical steps we can do to firstly recognize that it's happening to you, and secondly, try and get yourself into a point where you pull back a bit from maximum power to be able to function?
Yeah, great question. And something I've thought a lot about since. I think there are a small number of very easy things to do that will help. The first one, and in my lecture, I called it lighting a flare, like a distress flare. You just light it, throw it out, and it tells the world there is a problem here. And I derived a lot of comfort from knowing that the world, the system, will be aware now that there's a problem going on here, and they will do their best to find out what that problem is and send help. So the flare definitely helps. The phrase I used in the lecture was norming. And by that, I mean, in a profoundly abnormal setting, make as much of it as normal to your normal configuration as you can. So if you always get out of the car, walk to the back of the car, wait for the boot to go up, you always pick up the same bag, do that and do as much of it as you possibly can the way you would do any routine job. And I liken that to building a little scaffolding that's taking you no mental effort, but is allowing you to make a bit of progress through the case. And then the last one is offload things. Be prepared to have a thought that's come into your head and burn it, because it's not something you're able to do. You don't have the time, you don't have the resource, you don't have the equipment, you don't have the brain power. So you just need to burn it, and perhaps they'll come back later. But at that moment, you can't spare the power. They're probably 3 straightforward things that will get you started.
And just to confirm, it wasn't an actual flare you left off. It was the button on the radio, which opens the channel to the entire group holding those radios. And actually turned out that then the control desk had been listening to everything that was going on for you throughout the whole of the next, what I guess felt like hours, but was probably a very short period of time. We are obsessed a little bit, St Emlyn's and others, and perhaps in emergency medicine and pre-hospital care, about talking about halo procedures, high acuity, low occurrence procedures, and we can list them off: resuscitative hysterotomy, lateral canthotomy, thoracotomy, and we talk about them all the time. Now, it strikes me that what you're talking about is also a halo procedure. And we practice the practical ones, but maybe we don't practice these psychological halo type of procedures. How would you move forward, recommending for you to think about how this might happen again, and what you might put into practice for teaching other people, maybe on some of the courses you do, or just as you develop your own teams?
You're right. I do a lot of teaching and training and simulation, and I've never thought about it like that before, like a practical halo and a cognitive halo. And this probably was one of those. And when I speak to colleagues who've been confronted with similarly very challenging situations, who've done the ATACC course, which I do teach on, as you mentioned, sometimes they say to me, Hutch, it felt like an ATACC scenario. And to me, that's quite a rewarding thing for them to tell me, because I think what that's telling me is we are artificially creating for them a replica of that cognitive halo situation, and we're allowing them to do that in a safe environment where no one's at any risk. We're allowing them to debrief that, facilitated, discuss it, reflect on it, do it again. They do 12 jobs at least over the 3 days. And I actually, when I run the course with 3 or 4 a year, And I often look at it and think, I wish I was doing this again. Because I remember doing it. I did it in 2014. And it was great fun, but it's changed a lot. It's matured a lot, particularly in terms of cognitive and psychological aspects, rather than just being flat out trauma care. The two go hand in hand. And I wish I could benefit from being pushed in that way. And I think if I had have been pushed in that way in the training environment more recently, it probably would have helped me on scene.
This is probably a nice point to just think about the ATACC course, which I'm sure listeners will have heard of. And let's be honest, you don't need the publicity because you are oversubscribed every course. Every now and again, I see it come up on social media. There's a place available tomorrow, and I'm sure within 10 minutes they've gone.
Yeah.
Just remind us what ATACC stands for and a bit about the background to that course, because there may well be people who are listening who would be interested in exploring and going on that and deciding if it's right for them.
Brilliant. And if you are, you'd be very welcome. ATACC stands for Anesthesia, Trauma and Critical Care. It is a 3-day course derived nearly 30 years ago now as a alternative to other trauma resuscitation courses to be a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more forward-looking and progressing with the available evidence in trauma care. So we've stuck to that, but we've built a lot of other things around it. We've built in the cognitive halos. I'm going to pinch your term. We have built in some mentoring. We've built in some welfare. We've built in some human factors. We've built in a session around burnout and PTSD and some strategies to help people A, prevent that, or B, deal with it if you're feeling the heat from doing this kind of work. So we think it's a pretty up-to-date, cutting-edge critical care trauma course that also encompasses some of the relevant non-technical things to enable someone to perform at that clinical level and to do that with longevity. And we do that over 3 days, long days. They are 8 till 6 every day. And you're in a team of 7 people that you stay in for the entire course. They get to know each other. Most of them stay in touch afterwards, even internationally. Multidisciplinary team with ambulance service, pre-hospital critical care, in-hospital colleagues, sometimes fire and rescue, sometimes police, sometimes others. And the team building and the communication and the leadership are all things that are also integrated into the course. The main tool we use for that is highly realistic simulation in real environments. So we have a wonderful sort of Disneyland of trauma as our training site. It's a fire and rescue training headquarters. Nothing is made up. If we want a train crash, there's a train. If we want an RTC, there are several cars, some of which are on their roofs, some of which are buried under a train, whatever. If we want something that's on fire, something's on fire. So that helps us do a number of things, particularly in that cognitive stressor domain.
And I've never been on an ATACC course. I'd love to go on one. I have seen many pictures and I've spoken to people about it. And I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a minute because I'm really interested in how we bring clinical education away from the patient's side. I do a lot of undergraduate education and we're really struggling to have enough people for our students to see. And simulation is clearly a place where that might be of benefit. And a lot of the simulation we do at the moment is what we call low fidelity, which is another word for a little bit crap. But the simulations you're doing are at the other end. And if I was being unkind, perhaps, or being just a little bit cynical, I'd call it trauma cosplay. It's dress up and it's messing about outside. Persuade me that your method of simulation is not just boys messing around with big toys.
No, it's a really valid observation. And I think for a while there was a perception that one of the reasons we simulate like that is because it makes good pictures. And it does. You do a clip and there's emergency vehicles and people in all the right uniform and you put it on Instagram reels, it gets loads of likes, right? Because it's engaging. There is more to it. And each of those simulations has a lot of background work and evidence and paperwork and risk assessment and predetermined learning outcomes and objectives and a predetermined sort of set of outcomes to focus the debrief on and a really evidence-based, rigorously taught debrief structure to all of the staff that deliver those simulations. So I think the building blocks are robust, but it also does something else. It does something about how do you teach the individual or individuals, the learners, not just to be able to deliver whatever decision or intervention it is you're trying to teach. But how do you get them to do that when the chips are down? And how do you get them to do that to real people? And one of our key things with simulation on the ATACC course is that we almost never use any mannequins. They're all live actors. We have a film level makeup crew that come and do our special effects with wearable prosthetics. Yeah, it makes good pictures. But we look after people, right? And one of the things that makes our job challenging and also wonderful is they're real people that we look after. And we replicate that in the training context. And the things that you see making a good picture or a good Instagram reel are things that are there to replicate the feelings and the primary stresses that we have in those situations when we're dealing with those real people. So we think it's a more rounded method of teaching people to make the decisions or do the interventions or clinical skills in the environment that they're going to be asked to do them.
And I am persuaded. I do think simulation in the way you're describing it is educationally sound. I think it's well thought through. I've met other members of the ATACC team and you're not messing about here. This is not just playing around, but what you're describing is hugely expensive.
Correct.
And the infrastructure behind it is hugely expensive. And trying to persuade education systems to have the appetite for this is really difficult because they just don't have the money. If I was to try and do this with a group of medical students, I would get frankly laughed at. How can we use some of the things you've learned in the ATACC course in areas where we don't have the same financial resources? And that may not just be in undergraduate education, but other countries as well, where the ability to go to a fire and rescue centre and have all this stuff just isn't there. What are the lessons you think we can take out of ATACC for other places that would love to do similar work?
It's a challenge, and it's one that we have tried to do because we have been increasingly asked, hey, ATACC guys, can you come to our event and can you run stuff? And we realised through doing that, the resource intensity that is involved in doing what we do. So for the course, we have about 1.5 lorry loads, big lorries of gear transported to the site. And I could tell you how much it costs, but it's frankly obscene. So being able to do that without that level of resource is not easy. Favours help a lot. And often colleagues, particularly in emergency services, are motivated and keen to cross-pollinate and share. So example being when we're asked to go abroad, we can't take lorries abroad. They don't fit on the planes. So we make connections with other organisations, perhaps an ambulance service, perhaps a hospital, perhaps the police force. And we build up a relationship with them and we say, do you want some places on our training? You can come. Cost you nothing. Can we use your place? Or can we use your training gear? Or can we use your training medical equipment bags, for example? So there's a bit of tit for tat there and a bit of relationship building. Actors, they take up no space and they cost nothing if you look after them. So you offer them to come on the theory sessions. Perhaps they're interested, perhaps they're medical undergraduates, perhaps they're paramedic students. So they get an opportunity. We give them the hospitality, so we look after them. They have meals and drinks and stuff with us. They get to get amongst our team and hopefully chat and reflect and learn a little bit. And then you've got your sort of advanced patient simulator in the country already. They help you get around the country. They usually know the local language, for example. So I think it's all about building relationships with services, with colleagues, with organisations that could benefit from our help and we could benefit from theirs. Particularly when we travel, we have to do it really light. And there's some key lessons we've learned, yeah.
So there's all sorts of things that we can take from that into our own environment. And I'm not a big fan of education depending on favours. I know what you mean by favours, but the professionalisation of medical education, I think, is something that we're lagging behind in a bit because we do expect lots of people to give lots for nothing. And I'm sure that you are not making a lot of money out of this as an ATACC team or as an individual. And it's a very altruistic thing that the team are doing. But the world is no longer full of altruistic people. And so I guess it's finding your people who want to help and then embracing them and looking after them.
Yeah, we have had to professionalise the course that we run in the UK to reflect exactly what you're saying. So when people are travelling internationally and they're paying money to us to facilitate the course for them, plus their own expenditure, we can no longer afford to say, well, we might have 5 patients for this one, but we would like 15. So we have had to professionalise the offering for the course that people pay a substantial amount of money for so that we are delivering a reliable, credible, professional thing that meets the educational objectives. We don't use favours for the course. We can't. We do that when we're running lighter or taster type sessions, perhaps in other places or in other countries or at other people's events where they want a little flavour of what we do.
And I know the ATACC team now, it started off as a nucleus of this course and the idea, but this has expanded into the faculty with qualifications. And I know Simon is involved, Simon Carley, obviously, and others. Just give us a brief idea about how ATACC has grown from a little idea 20, 30 years ago, let's do a course, to what it is now and the other things that are available.
So the first thing is we've developed an amazing team over nearly 30 years. We have representatives from almost every acute care speciality all across Europe and the world. We have people from Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, all that fly to the UK and teach the course. So we've got a massive international wealth and breadth of expertise from all different disciplines as well. We've got paramedics, we've got nurses, we've got doctors, we've got firefighters, all within that team. And I think we realise that's such a powerhouse, particularly to bring all of that international perspective to the UK and share it and say, look, there are all these other ways of doing things. We've started to look at how else can we use that powerhouse. And we do a little bit of it at events, as we've talked about, to give people a bit of a flavour and a taste of what we do. And we do teach people how we simulate so that they can try and replicate that as best they can back in their own systems or services. And recently, as hot off the press this, I suppose, we are translating our knowledge of teaching trauma in that way to teaching cardiac arrest in that way. Simon Carley is involved. It's great to have him, and a number of other colleagues from the UK. John Barrett has also joined us, and the SPEAR course is being brought into the ATACC umbrella, and we will be replicating the type of training you've heard me describe on the ATACC course, which is totally trauma focused, and doing the same thing for cardiac arrest patients.
And remind me what SPEAR stands for.
we've redefined it actually. So it originally stood for, let me get this right, Specialist Percutaneous Endovascular Aortic Resuscitation. That was a bit complicated, so we've changed it to Specialist Endovascular Advanced Resuscitation.
And I guess that is now about some of the things we've heard talked about at the Basics conference here about how we can nuance our care of cardiac arrest, how we can be more invasive in our monitoring, and how we bring some of the trauma mindset and maybe, just maybe, reinvigorate the desire to do better in cardiac arrest. Because perhaps I think ALS, for all of its benefits, we should never have called it advanced life support. And because there's so much more we could do.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description, actually. I think if I go back to how I described the origins of the ATACC course as being a course that wants to push the envelope a bit and really operate at the limits of the currently available evidence, embracing all of what's available and looking forward, that's what we're trying to do with cardiac arrest. We will embrace everything that's available. We'll look at what's on the periphery and what people are doing in trials and experimental setups. We will take perspectives from all around the world. We'll deliver that in an innovative, immersive way. And I think infusing people is important. People are often pretty enthused about coming and doing trauma. And cardiac arrest, you think, well, just run the loops, right? I do 30 to 2, I put the drugs, give the shocks, resuscitation done. Actually, I think resuscitation physiology is fascinating. I'm a cardiac intensivist as well. That's my hospital job. So there's loads of really interesting stuff we can teach about heart and lungs and get people really deeply engaging in what has gone on, what can I do to fix it, that goes so far beyond running loops of an algorithm, right? Algorithm is essential. Without it, more advanced physiological targeting or nuancing or whatever can't be done. So they have to exist in harmony. And we are not doing an alternative to those algorithmic courses. We're doing something that tags on the side of it.
So people listening to this, firstly, they're going to go off and practice their cognitive halos, but they may be interested in doing some of these courses. And in the UK, study leave funding is not huge, but saving up a bit and trying to get to one of these courses. If they were interested in getting involved and choosing a course or working out what's best for them, how can they best find out the information to think about where their money might be best spent?
If people want to spend money with us, we would be delighted to see you. You're right. The course doesn't make any profit. It's a community interest company. It's part of the ATACC Group, which is a limited company that runs commercial training, and they essentially power us for free. They make money from selling courses, and then that money goes into our training for healthcare professional colleagues. they run a great website, attackgroup.com. So go and have a look on there, and all the courses are there, and their contact details for the team to ask questions.
Hutch, it's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a bit like Simon in that it feels like you've got a Hermione Granger time turner, because I don't know how people like you and Simon manage to do all this stuff unless you're doing it twice. But please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for talking to us. And please, let's talk again soon more about the advances in resuscitation and how we can continue developing and educating people.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me.